My name is Carol, I'm 65 years old, and my own daughter publicly humiliated me and cut up my credit card at Thanksgiving dinner. Before I tell you about the priceless look on her face the next day, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The smell of roast turkey and sage stuffing usually fills my Scottsdale home with warmth on Thanksgiving. It's a smell of family, of tradition, of love. But that year the air turned toxic. The clinking of silverware against my best china and the gentle murmur of family chatter filled the dining room. My brother, his wife, their kids, all gathered. It was peaceful. It felt normal. Until it wasn't. One sharp sound cut through it all. The scrape of a chair against the hardwood floor. It was my daughter, Jessica. She stood at the head of the table, her face a mask of cold fury. Everyone stopped talking. My nephew froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. I have an announcement to make, Jessica said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was more poisonous than any venom. She held up a familiar gold credit card. My card. The one I use for groceries, for gas, for the small necessities of a retired life. Mom, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, ignoring everyone else in the room. I've been thinking a lot about your situation. About your finances. She let the word "your" hang in the air, as if it were a dirty secret. I've decided that I've been enabling you for too long. A hot flush crept up my neck. I could feel my brother's eyes on me, filled with a pity that burned worse than any anger. Jessica smiled, a thin, cruel line. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. From her purse she pulled out a pair of small, sharp scissors. The kind you use for sewing. I'm doing this for your own good, she cooed. And then, in front of my entire family, she began to cut. Snip. The sound was unnaturally loud in the dead silence. The first piece of plastic fell onto the table. Snip. The magnetic strip was severed. Snip. Snip. 4 jagged pieces of gold plastic now lay on the polished mahogany. She looked directly at me, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that everyone could hear. Learn to live without my money. It felt like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my chest. I couldn't look at anyone. I just stared at the pattern on my dinner plate, the one I'd inherited from my own mother. Jessica then scooped up the pieces of the card and, with a final gesture of contempt, dropped them onto my half-eaten slice of turkey. They glistened under the chandelier light, nestled in the gravy. Enjoy your dinner, she spat, before turning on her heel and storming out of the house. The front door slammed shut, rattling the pictures on the wall. The silence she left behind was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of their pity was a physical thing, pressing down on my shoulders. My sister-in-law finally cleared her throat, her gaze fixed firmly on her mashed potatoes. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me had frozen solid, a core of ice in the center of my shame. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and picked the 4 pieces of plastic off my plate. They were still warm from her hand. My hand closed around them, the sharp edges digging into my palm. I didn't feel the pain. All I felt was a cold, quiet clarity wash over me. The pity in my family's eyes vanished, replaced by a single burning thought. Jessica thought this was a declaration of war. She had no idea the war had been won years ago, and she was just a casualty who hadn't heard the news yet. She thought this was the end. She had no idea it was the beginning. I excused myself from the table with a quiet murmur, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. I didn't look at my brother, whose face was a mixture of shock and a deep, uncomfortable pity that felt like an insult. I didn't look at his wife, who was suddenly fascinated by the silverware next to her plate. I just kept my eyes forward as I walked out of the dining room. The 4 pieces of plastic clutched so tightly in my fist, I could feel the imprints of my own fingernails digging into my palm. The hushed whispers started before I even reached the staircase. The words were faint, but they were sharp enough to pierce the thick numbness that was settling over me. Humiliating. Poor Carol. Has she always been dependent on her? Their words were like mosquitoes buzzing at my ears, but I didn't sweat them away. I let them buzz. They were just part of the storm that had just broken over my life. I climbed the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, each step a conscious, deliberate effort. My hand slid along the smooth oak banister, grounding me. My destination was the small room at the end of the hall that I'd called my home office for 30 years. It was more of a storage room now, filled with old books, boxes of photos, and the quiet scent of forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the sliver of afternoon light coming through the blinds, illuminating a world that felt frozen in time. The air was stale, smelling of old paper and memories. I walked over to the heavy oak desk that had belonged to my late husband, Robert. My hand was shaking now, a fine tremor I couldn't control. I opened my palm and let the 4 pieces of the card fall onto the dusty surface. They looked pathetic, insignificant, for little jagged pieces of gold plastic that had just detonated my life. Or so everyone in this house believed. My gaze drifted to the corner of the room, to a 4-drawer filing cabinet, also oak, that matched the desk. It was an old sturdy piece of furniture, unremarkable. I hadn't opened the bottom drawer in at least a decade, but I knew exactly what was inside. I walked over to the built-in bookshelf and reached behind a row of faded encyclopedias, the ones Robert had insisted we buy for Jessica when she was a child. My fingers closed around a small cold brass key attached to a simple string. It had been hidden there for nearly 20 years waiting. I knelt on the floor, the old wood creaking a complaint under my knees. My reflection was a distorted blur on the polished brass lock. The key slid into the keyhole with a familiar, satisfying click. It had been so long. I took a deep breath, the dusty air filling my lungs, and turned it. The lock disengaged with a solid thunk that echoed in the quiet room. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. This was it, the point of no return. I pulled the handle. The drawer slid open on its metal runners with a low groan, like a waking giant. It wasn't full of old photographs or sentimental keepsakes from Jessica's childhood. It was packed tight with manila folders, dozens of them, each one neatly labeled in my own clear, steady handwriting. My trembling fingers hovered over the tabs, reading the names that chronicled my secret life. Sedona Property Deeds, Phoenix Tech Ventures, Investment Portfolio, Morgan Stanley Contingency Account Agreement, Robert Miller Life Insurance and Estate Settlement. It was all there. A complete hidden history. A life Jessica knew nothing about. A life she couldn't even begin to imagine. I pulled out the first folder, labeled Sedona. Inside were the original property deeds for 2 acres of pristine land bordering a state park, the papers crisp and heavy. This was part of my inheritance from my parents, something my father had told me on his deathbed to hold on to never let go of unless my life depended on it. Jessica thought it was just a worthless patch of desert I'd been too sentimental to sell after her grandfather's funeral. She had no idea its value had skyrocketed in the last decade, becoming a prime target for luxury developers. Next, I pulled out a thick binder. Phoenix Tech Ventures. Inside, protected by plastic sleeves, were page after page of stock certificates and quarterly reports. Not from big, famous companies, but from small tech startups I had taken a chance on back in the late 90s, using the money from Robert's life insurance policy. Money I told everyone I'd lost in the dot-com bust to avoid unwanted attention and the inevitable requests for loans. Most of those companies had failed, but 2 of them hadn't. 2 of them had been bought out by giants like Intel and Cisco. My hands were steady now. The ice in my gut was spreading, turning from the shock of humiliation into something hard and cold. Resolve. Jessica thought she held all the cards. She thought the money she so magnanimously doled out to me in a monthly allowance was hers. She thought the house we were sitting in, the cars she drove, the life she flaunted, was a testament to her success. She was wrong. It was all a carefully constructed illusion I had created to protect myself, to give her a life her father and I never had. An illusion she had just shattered with a pair of sewing scissors. I looked at the 4 pieces of plastic on the desk, then back at the open drawer. That drawer didn't just hold papers. It held the truth. And the truth was about to set me free. I sat there on the floor of my dusty office, the smell of old paper filling my senses, and the years just melted away. It wasn't a gentle wave of nostalgia. It was a tidal wave of memory, and it crashed over me with the force of a physical blow. The weight of every sacrifice, every exhausting hour, every choice I made for her, came rushing back with a clarity that was almost painful. I wasn't always a quiet retiree living in this nice house in Scottsdale. Long before this, I was Carol Miller, RN, working the night shift in the ICU at Scottsdale General. I could still feel the ache in my feet that settled deep into my bones after a 12-hour shift on those unforgiving linoleum floors. I could still smell the cloying scent of antiseptic that clung to my scrubs, my hair, my skin, a smell that never truly washed out. I remembered the harsh fluorescent lights that made every patient look pale and fragile, the constant symphony of beeps and alarms that became the soundtrack to my life. That sound meant life or it meant death, and it never ever stopped. My salary wasn't much, but it was steady. After Robert died so suddenly from a heart attack, leaving me with a mountain of grief and a 10-year-old Jessica to raise, that steady paycheck was my lifeline. But it wasn't enough. Not for the life I wanted for her. I wanted her to have everything. Piano lessons, summer camps, nice clothes, a safe car when she turned 16. I wanted her to have a life untouched by the gnawing fear of a bill you can't pay. A fear I knew all too well from my own childhood. So I took on more. After my hospital shift ended at 7 a.m., I'd drive home in a daze, sleep for 4 hours if I was lucky, and then head to a small tutoring center where I helped high school kids with their biology and chemistry homework. I lived on black coffee and sheer willpower. I remember one Christmas morning Jessica was about 14, and she was so excited about the new laptop I'd gotten her. It was the top of the line. I watched her open it via a fuzzy video call from the hospital break room, my heart aching with a mixture of joy and profound exhaustion, because I'd picked up a double shift on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day to pay for it. I told her I had to work because they were short-staffed. I never told her the truth. I never wanted her to feel the weight of that kind of sacrifice. When she got her acceptance letter to Arizona State University, I cried in the hospital linen closet, silent tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down my face until I could barely breathe. I told her a partial academic scholarship had come through. The truth? I had cashed in some of the stocks from that hidden portfolio. It was the first time I touched that money. I set up a dedicated college fund and paid her tuition every semester, right out of an account she never knew existed. She graduated debt-free, believing she had earned it all on her own merit. And I let her believe it. I wanted her to feel that pride. The biggest sacrifice came when she decided she wanted to buy her first house, a beautiful Spanish-style home in a desirable neighborhood. The down payment was staggering. She came to me, stressed and defeated, saying she'd never be able to afford it. She thought her own savings and her then-boyfriend's income weren't enough. That was my chance to tell her the truth, to sit her down and show her what I had built, what we had. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too afraid it would change her, too proud of the independent woman I thought I had raised. So I sold one of the 2 acres of land in Sedona, the piece with the less spectacular view. The sale brought in more than enough. I had the money wired to a separate account and then wrote her a check for the full down payment. I told her it was the last of the money from her father's estate, a final gift from him that I had been saving for a special occasion. I even went to a lawyer, Mr. Harrison, to have official-looking documents drawn up to make the trust distribution look legitimate. She hugged me, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Mom. Dad would be so happy." She never questioned it. She never asked to see the detailed paperwork from the estate. She just took the money and built her perfect life. I sat there on the floor of my dusty office, the Sedona deed in my lap, and the bitterness was a physical taste in my mouth, acrid and hot. Every skipped meal, every lonely holiday, every lie I told to protect her from the harsh realities of the world. It had all been a brick in the foundation of her life. A foundation she had just taken a sledgehammer to in front of our entire family. She hadn't just cut up a credit card. She had desecrated a lifetime of my love and sacrifice. And she was about to find out just how much that foundation was really worth. The land in Sedona was just the beginning. It was the nest egg, the safety net my parents had given me. It was old money, patient and solid. But the real engine of my financial independence, the fortune that had funded Jessica's entire adult life, was sitting right there in that binder labeled Phoenix Tech Ventures. It was new money, risky and explosive. After Robert died and the initial shock wore off, a different kind of fear set in. A cold, creeping fear of being vulnerable. Robert and I had been through a difficult divorce years before Jessica was born. A messy affair that had left me financially devastated. I had seen firsthand how quickly a woman's financial security could evaporate, how the life you thought you had could be pulled out from under you. We eventually reconciled and remarried, but the lesson stayed with me, branded into my soul. I promised myself I would never ever be dependent on anyone again. Not a husband and certainly not a child. So, while Jessica was in middle school, obsessed with pop stars and shopping at the mall, I was secretly educating myself. My night shift at the hospital gave me long, quiet hours between crises. I didn't just read medical journals. I read the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and obscure investment newsletters I subscribed to under a P.O. box. I learned about venture capital, seed rounds, angel investing, and IPOs. The vocabulary was alien at first, but I was a quick study. I had to be. Phoenix in the late 90s was a burgeoning tech hub. Everyone was talking about Silicon Valley, but I saw the potential right here in my own backyard. There was an energy, a hunger. I started going to investor meetings. I'd change out of my nursing scrubs in the hospital bathroom, put on the one good navy blue blazer I owned, and drive my sensible Toyota to conference rooms in anonymous office parks. I was almost always the only woman there who wasn't serving coffee or taking minutes. The men in their expensive suits and power ties would look right through me, their eyes glazing over as they dismissed me as a bored housewife who'd wandered into the wrong room. I let them. Their condescension was my camouflage. While they were busy posturing and trying to impress each other, I listened. I listened quietly, took meticulous notes, and learned to distinguish between charismatic hype and genuine innovation. I started small, using the $100,000 from the life insurance policy Robert left. My first few investments were total losses. I lost $10,000 on a company that promised to revolutionize online pet food delivery. It was a painful, humiliating lesson, but I didn't give up. I just got smarter. Then I found two. One was a tiny software company run by two ASU graduates out of their garage. They were awkward, brilliant kids who had developed a new kind of data encryption that was faster and more secure than anything on the market. The big guys laughed at them. I listened to their pitch and saw the future. I invested $20,000. The second was a startup making specialized microchips for medical imaging equipment. My nursing background gave me an edge. I understood the need for what they were creating in a way the finance guys couldn't. I put $30,000 into that one. For years, nothing happened. I held my breath and kept working my shifts, tutoring on the side, living frugally. Then, in the early 2000s, the world changed. Data security became a billion-dollar industry. The encryption company was bought out by a major corporation in a deal that made headlines. My initial $20,000 investment after the buyout was worth nearly $2 million. A few years after that, the medical chip company went public. My $30,000 exploded into a portfolio worth more than I had ever dreamed possible. I was a multimillionaire and no one knew. I never told a soul. Not my brother, not my closest friends, and certainly not Jessica. I hired David Chan, a discreet financial advisor at Morgan Stanley who came highly recommended for his integrity and his ability to keep his mouth shut. We quietly managed the growing fortune, funneling it through a series of trusts and holding companies. On paper, Carol Miller was a retired nurse living on a modest pension and her late husband's Social Security. The beautiful house in Scottsdale? I bought it with cash through a trust. The BMW Jessica drove around town, telling everyone she got a great deal on the lease after a big promotion at work? I paid for it in full and had my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, create a fake lease agreement. The vacations, the designer clothes, the monthly allowance she so generously gave me from her money? It was all my money, trickling back to her through a carefully constructed narrative. A narrative that made her feel powerful and successful, and kept me safe and invisible. She confused my silence with weakness, my discretion with dependence. She had no idea that her entire world, the very air she breathed, was underwritten by the quiet, unassuming woman she had just tried to destroy. And now I was about to call in the debt. The house was completely dark and silent when I finally came downstairs. The lingering smell of turkey and pumpkin pie was gone, replaced by the sterile scent of the lemon cleaner my brother's wife had used to tidy up before their hasty retreat. They had all left hours ago, offering awkward, pitying goodbyes at the door that I barely registered. I had accepted their clumsy sympathies with a numb nod, my mind already miles away, strategizing, planning. Now it was just me. Midnight. The digital clock on the oven glowed a lonely 12 a.m. The only other light in the entire house was the cold blue glow of my laptop screen on the kitchen island. I had the 4 pieces of the credit card laid out next to the keyboard, like carefully arranged evidence at a crime scene. To my left was the folder with my Morgan Stanley account information, open to a page with David Chen's contact details. My fingers were poised over the keys, but for a long moment I hesitated. A wave of profound grief washed over me, so powerful it made me dizzy. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't some corporate takeover. This was my daughter, my only child, the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose fevers I had soothed, whose heartbreaks I had mended. Was I really about to do this? Was I about to dismantle the life of the person I loved most in the world? A traitorous tear escaped and slid down my cheek. Then I heard her voice in my head again, as clearly as if she were standing right next to me. The voice wasn't from that afternoon. It was from a few years ago, after a minor argument about a vacation she wanted to take. She had sighed dramatically and said, "Mom, you just don't understand the pressure I'm under to maintain this lifestyle. This lifestyle. The one I had secretly paid for." The memory was like a splash of ice water. The tear on my cheek felt cold. The grief vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that was sharp and clean. The decision was made. I opened my email client. The recipient's name was already there, at the top of my frequent contacts list, David Chen. David had been my advisor for 15 years. He was sharp, discreet, and fiercely loyal. He knew the whole story. In fact, he was the one who had warned me this day might come. I remembered the meeting in his polished downtown Phoenix office 5 years ago. Jessica had just had a minor financial success with an online boutique and was becoming increasingly arrogant about her business acumen. She had started insisting that her name be added to my main household account, to make it easier to help you manage things, Mom. It was a power play and we both knew it. David had looked at me over the top of his expensive glasses, his expression grave. "Carol," he had said, "let's set up a sole signatory override clause. It's a contingency. In the event you feel your control over the primary assets is compromised, a single directive from you, an email, a phone call with a confirmation code, will trigger a complete lockdown. It will sever all secondary users and consolidate the liquid assets into a protected account that only you can access. It might seem like overkill now, but it's better to have a fire extinguisher you never need than to need one you don't have." At the time I thought he was being paranoid. This was Jessica, my little girl. She could be entitled, yes, but malicious? I couldn't believe it. But I trusted David's judgment. I signed the papers, filed them away in that bottom drawer, and never thought about them again. Until tonight. Tonight that clause was my fire extinguisher and my house was on fire. I began to type. The message was short, precise, and devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. Subject: Urgent execute sole signatory override. David, please execute the sole signatory override clause on all accounts associated with my name, tax ID number. Effective immediately. Protocol as discussed in our agreement dated date. 1. Revoke access for all secondary users, specifically Jessica Miller. Social Security number. Point 2. Freeze all credit and debit cards linked to these accounts under her name. Point 3. Consolidate all liquid funds into the pre-established contingency account. Effective now. Please confirm via email once these actions are complete. Thank you, Carol Miller. My finger hovered over the mouse, the cursor blinking over the send button. It was a tiny white arrow on a screen, but it felt like the trigger of a weapon. I took one last, shuddering breath, the image of Jessica as a 5-year-old girl with pigtails flashing in my mind, and then I clicked. There was no sound other than the soft tap of the trackpad, but in the silent house it felt like a gunshot. It was done. The first domino had been pushed. The carefully constructed world I had built for Jessica was about to come crashing down around her. And she wouldn't even see it coming until she was buried in the rubble. The next morning the Arizona sun streamed through my kitchen window, bright and indifferent. It was a perfect cloudless Friday. I made myself a cup of coffee, the familiar ritual of grinding the beans and the rich aroma, a small anchor in a world that had tilted on its axis. I sat at my kitchen island, the same spot where I'd executed my financial coup just hours before, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. I knew Jessica's routine as well as I knew my own. Friday was her pamper and provision day. A 9 a.m. hot yoga class, followed by a trip to the upscale Whole Foods at the Scottsdale Quarter. She treated grocery shopping like a red carpet event, always dressed immaculately in designer athleisure wear, her cart filled with the most expensive, artisanal and organic items she could find. It wasn't about sustenance. It was a performance of effortless wealth and wellness. Around 11:30 a.m., I allowed myself to picture the scene, playing it out in my mind like a movie. I could see her so clearly, gliding down the aisles, her designer sunglasses perched on her head. A bottle of French rose that cost more than my first week's nursing salary. A wedge of imported Parmesan Reggiano. A small, perfect-looking filet mignon for one. She'd greet the cashier, a young kid probably working his way through college, with that dazzling practice smile. The one that made people feel special, the one she used to get what she wanted. Then would come the moment of truth. She'd pull out her sleek black Amex. Not the gold card she'd so dramatically cut up, but her primary card, the one linked directly to the main account, the one with the ludicrously high credit limit. She'd tap it on the reader, expecting that cheerful, affirmative beep that validated her existence. Instead, silence. Then a low electronic buzz of denial. The cashier would look at his screen, a flicker of confusion on his face. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it's been declined." Jessica's smile would falter just for a second. A crack in the perfect facade. Annoyance would flash in her eyes. "That's impossible," she'd say, her voice a little too sharp, loud enough for the people in line behind her to hear. "The system must be down. Try it again." He'd try it again. The same result. Declined. By now, the person behind her in line, a man in expensive golf attire, would be sighing impatiently, checking his Rolex. The woman behind him would be shifting her weight, her disapproval palpable. Jessica's face would start to flush, a splotchy, unattractive red creeping up her neck. This wasn't part of the performance. This was a public malfunction, a catastrophic wardrobe failure of the financial kind. I could see her fumbling for her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen as she pulled up her banking app. The screen would flash a message she'd never seen before. "Access denied. Please contact your financial institution." Panic would start to set in now, cold and sharp. She'd abandon her cart full of overpriced groceries without a word, stepping out of line as the cashier called after her. She'd dial a number from memory, her thumb hitting the screen with furious taps. David Chen's direct line. David, ever the professional, would answer on the second ring. "David Chen speaking." "David, it's Jessica Miller. Something is terribly wrong with my accounts. My card was just declined at Whole Foods. Of all places. It was so embarrassing. You need to fix this right now." Her voice would be a whip crack of entitlement and barely controlled panic. And then would come the beautiful, brutal, soul-crushing blow. David's voice would be perfectly calm, perfectly level, stripped of all warmth and familiarity. It would be the voice of a banker, not a family friend. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller. I can't discuss the details of the account with you." "What do you mean you can't discuss it? It's my account." "No, Ms. Miller," David would say, and I could picture him adjusting his tie, completely unfazed. "Your mother, Carol Miller, is and always has been the sole primary account holder. As of last night, per her direct, legally binding instruction, your access as a secondary user to all associated accounts has been permanently revoked. I suggest you direct any further inquiries to her. Have a good day." And he would hang up, leaving her with nothing but the dial tone. She would be left standing there, in the middle of a bustling Whole Foods, her phone in her hand, the world spinning. The humiliation, the confusion, the rage. It would all hit her at once. I could almost feel the shockwave from across town. My own phone, sitting silently on the counter beside me, suddenly buzzed to life, vibrating against the granite. The screen lit up with her picture. I looked at it, took a slow, deliberate sip of my now lukewarm coffee, and let it go to voicemail. The first call of many. The game had just begun. It rang 4 more times, one right after the other, with a frantic urgency. I let each call go to voicemail, picturing her growing panic and rage. On the 5th call, I decided it was time. I needed her to be at the absolute peak of her fury, her composure completely shattered. I answered and didn't say a word. I just held the phone to my ear and listened to her ragged breathing. "What did you do?" The shriek was so loud and sharp it felt like a physical assault. I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second. It was pure unfiltered rage. My cards don't work. The bank won't talk to me. David Chun hung up on me. Hung up. Everyone at Whole Foods stared at me like I was some kind of charity case. You have to fix this. Now. I let her tirade wash over me. It was just noise. The desperate, impotent roar of a queen who had just discovered her throne was made of cardboard. She went on, a breathless torrent of accusations and demands, her voice cracking with fury and disbelief. When she finally paused, gasping for air, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and utterly unshakable. Jessica, I said softly, as if speaking to a toddler having a tantrum, there is nothing to fix. What do you mean there's nothing to fix? You have to call the bank. Tell them they made a mistake. Tell them you were confused. They didn't make a mistake, I replied, my voice still even and low. And I'm not confused. I've never been more clear in my entire life. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting her hang on the line. The money was never yours, sweetheart. It has always been my money. A dead silence fell on the line. It was a different kind of silence than the one in the dining room the day before. That was shock. This was the sound of a universe collapsing. I could practically hear the gears in her head grinding to a halt, trying to process a statement that was simply fundamentally impossible to her. What are you talking about? She finally stammered, the rage completely gone, replaced by a tremor of genuine, terrified confusion. My business, my investments, the money from Dad's inheritance. Lies, Jessica, I said, cutting her off, my voice still soft but now with an edge of steel. All of it. A story I created. A cushion I built to give you a life without worry. A life you clearly didn't appreciate. Before she could form a response, before the disbelief could curdle back into anger, I hung up. I placed the phone back on the counter and my hand was perfectly steady. The feeling was not triumph. It was something deeper, quieter. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted from my shoulders. A weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for 35 years. I thought that would be the end of it for the day. I was naive. Less than an hour later, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Facebook. My niece had tagged me in a post. My stomach tightened. With a sense of dread, I clicked on it. And there it was. A long, rambling public post from Jessica, complete with a professionally shot, tearful-looking selfie. I don't know how to say this, it began, but I'm going through something truly horrific. My own mother, who I have supported and cared for my entire adult life, has turned on me. In what seems to be a state of declining mental health, she has somehow seized control of all my assets, my life's work, everything I have built. She has stolen from me. I am heartbroken, terrified, and a victim of elder financial abuse. Only in reverse. My only concern now is for her well-being, but she refuses to see reason. Please pray for my family and for my mother to get the help she so desperately needs. My blood ran cold. The audacity, the sheer venomous cruelty of it. She wasn't just trying to get the money back. She was trying to destroy my reputation, to lay the groundwork to have me declared incompetent. She was painting me as a senile, vindictive old woman. The comments were already pouring in. Oh, Jessica, I'm so sorry. You are so strong. This is horrible. We're here for you. Your mother always seemed so sweet. I guess you never know what goes on behind closed doors. She was trying to weaponize public sympathy. She was trying to frame this as a tragedy, with her as the blameless, loving daughter victim. She thought she could win a war of public opinion against a quiet, retired widow. A slow, cold anger began to burn through the calm I had felt just moments before. She wanted a fight? She wanted to air our dirty laundry for the world to see? Fine. But she was bringing hashtags and selfies to a war I was about to fight with legal documents, financial statements, and the full, unvarnished truth. And the truth was a weapon she stood no chance against. Jessica's Facebook post was a declaration of total war. She thought she was being clever, getting ahead of the narrative, painting me as the villain before I could even speak. But her battlefield was social media. A flimsy world of opinions and emotions where truth was optional. My battlefield was the real world. A world built on contracts, deeds, and the unyielding logic of the law. The next morning I wasn't scrolling through Facebook comments. I was sitting across a large mahogany desk from my lawyer, Mr. Harrison. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 60s who had handled Robert's estate years ago and had set up my trusts. He had a face that looked like it was carved from granite and a mind like a steel trap. I had forwarded him the link to Jessica's post. He read it on his computer, his face impassive. When he was done, he swiveled in his leather chair and looked at me. "She's made a critical error," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She's publicly accused you of a crime, theft and financial abuse. She has also publicly questioned your mental competency. That is slander, and it gives us significant leverage." He leaned forward. "So Carol, how far do you want to take this?" "All the way," I said, without a moment's hesitation. Within hours the first letters went out. They weren't angry or emotional. They were cold, legal and efficient, sent via certified mail. The first was a cease and desist order to Jessica, demanding the immediate removal of the slanderous posts and a public retraction. The second was a formal notice sent to the property management company of her luxury apartment, informing them that the lease, which was under my holding company's name, was being terminated at the end of the month due to non-payment by the listed occupant, a detail we could now legally enforce. The third was a letter to the Scottsdale Country Club, revoking her family membership, which I had been paying for annually to the tune of $20,000. Jessica, however, was not one to give up easily. Her next move was even more desperate and despicable than the Facebook post. She tried to make a large cash withdrawal, $50,000, from a joint savings account we'd had for years, an account I used for emergency home repairs and property taxes. It was the one account she still had access to because it required both our signatures for major changes. She must have thought I'd forgotten about it in the larger sweep. She walked into the bank and presented the withdrawal slip. The teller, a young woman Jessica had charmed for years with her smiles and casual pleasantries, looked at her screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller, there's a hold on this account. I can't process this withdrawal without the other signatory present." Jessica, I was later told by the bank manager who called me to verify the situation, caused a scene. She yelled. She claimed it was her money. She threatened to sue. The manager politely but firmly escorted her out of the bank. She left empty-handed and furious. But her most venomous attack was yet to come. It was the move that proved to me that the daughter I had raised was well and truly gone. A few days later I received a phone call from my cousin in Tucson, the one who had attended the disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. He sounded deeply uncomfortable. "Carol? Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "I just had the strangest call from Jessica." My stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot. "What did she say, Tom?" "Well," he stammered, clearly embarrassed, "she said she was worried about you. Deeply worried. That you've been acting erratically, forgetting things. She said you were making strange financial decisions and that she was talking to a lawyer about seeking a legal custody. A guardianship, she called it. To protect you from yourself. She asked if I would be willing to provide a statement about your behavior at dinner." I had to sit down on the nearest chair. I felt the blood drain from my face. Guardianship. She was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. She was trying to use the law to strip me of my autonomy, to take everything by force under the guise of caring for me. It was the ultimate betrayal. A move so cruel, so calculated, it took my breath away. She wasn't just trying to get the money back. She was trying to erase me. That was the last straw. My anger solidified into something harder and sharper than steel. There would be no more quiet maneuvers, no more behind-the-scenes letters. It was time for a public and undeniable display of power. I called David Chun. My voice was dangerously calm. "David," I said. "It's time. Repossess the cars." The next afternoon, as Jessica was likely in her apartment plotting her next legal move to have me committed, 2 large tow trucks rumbled into her pristine, gated community. The security guard, who had a copy of the vehicle titles I had faxed over, waved them through. One hooked up the white Tesla Model S. The other, the silver BMW X5. Neighbors peered out from behind their curtains as the symbols of Jessica's perfect life were unceremoniously hoisted into the air and driven away, leaving 2 dark, empty oil stains on the pavement where they used to be. There was no hashtag for that. Just the cold, hard reality of consequence. In a town like Scottsdale, news travels faster than a desert wildfire. especially news that involves money, drama, and a precipitous fall from grace. The repossession of the cars was not a quiet affair. It was a spectacle. It was a visible, undeniable symbol that the Jessica Miller everyone thought they knew was a fraud. Her carefully curated image of effortless wealth and success was stripped away, quite literally, on the back of two tow trucks in broad daylight. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The world she had built, a world that ran on appearances and social currency, turned on her overnight. The friends who had flocked to her Facebook posts with messages of performative support suddenly went silent. Their sympathy, it turned out, was only for the version of Jessica who could pick up the check at a fancy brunch at the Phoenician. The broke, carless, potentially homeless version? Not so much. I experienced it firsthand a week later. I had forced myself to go to my usual grocery store, AJ's Fine Foods, a gourmet market where Jessica and her circle were regulars. I refused to hide. This was my town, too. I was in the produce aisle considering a bunch of asparagus when I saw her. Not Jessica, but one of her closest friends, a woman named Tiffany who I'd met at several family functions. Tiffany was impeccably dressed, her hair perfect, her cart already half full of expensive organic goods. She saw me at the same instant. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of sheer panic in her expression. She immediately looked down at her shopping list as if it were the most fascinating document she'd ever read, abruptly spun her massive cart around with a squeal of its wheels, and practically fled down the dairy aisle. It was a small thing, a non-event, but it spoke volumes. I wasn't the one they were ashamed of. I was just a quiet older woman buying vegetables. They were ashamed to be associated with her. The illusion had shattered, and no one wanted to be hit by the flying shards of her social ruin. The calls stopped coming to her. The invitations to charity galas, polo matches, and exclusive dinner parties evaporated. Her life had been a series of carefully staged events, and without the funding to produce them, the show was over. I heard through the family grapevine my brother, who was now calling me almost daily with sheepish, transparent attempts to get back in my good graces, that things were unraveling quickly for her. The notice of lease termination had sent her into a complete panic. She couldn't afford the rent on her own, and with her credit now undoubtedly in shambles, she had no hope of finding a similar place. Her online boutique, which had always been more of a vanity project than a profitable business, started to flounder without the constant infusion of my cash to cover marketing and inventory. The stylish facade was crumbling, revealing the shaky, debt-ridden structure beneath. One evening I was sitting on my patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. Hello. There was a pause, then a hesitant, syrupy voice. Carol? It's Susan. Susan. Another one of Jessica's inner circle. The self-appointed queen bee. A woman whose life revolved around gossip and maintaining her spot at the top of the Scottsdale social ladder. I was just calling to see how you were, she said, her voice oozing a false sincerity that was almost comical. We've all been so worried about you and this whole terrible situation with Jessica. She was fishing. She wanted the inside story she could peddle to the rest of her friends over cocktails. I decided to give her nothing she could use. That's very kind of you to call, Susan, I said politely, my voice cool and distant. But I'm doing just fine. In fact, I'm doing wonderfully. Oh, she said, momentarily thrown off. But Jessica's posts online, she made it sound so dire. Like you weren't well. Ah, yes, I said with a small dry chuckle. Well, people can write whatever they like online, can't they? The truth is, I'm simply reorganizing my financial affairs after my retirement. You know how it is. Sometimes a little spring cleaning is necessary to get rid of things that no longer serve you. There was a beat of stunned silence on her end. She had expected tears, complaints, a story of a distraught, confused mother. She got a woman in complete, unshakable control. Oh, she finally said, her voice completely deflated. Well, that's good to hear. The call ended quickly after that. I knew exactly what would happen next. Susan would immediately call Tiffany, and then the others. The story would spread like lightning. Carol's fine. She's sharp as a tack. She's in charge. The story Jessica told us isn't the real story. And with that, The final nail was hammered into the coffin of Jessica's social life. She wasn't a tragic victim anymore. She was just the daughter who had lied, who had overplayed her hand and lost spectacularly. Her greatest fear wasn't being poor. It was being irrelevant. It was being exposed as a fraud. And I had just handed her a life sentence of both. The decision to sell the big house in Scottsdale was surprisingly easy. As soon as the for sale sign went up, a wave of relief washed over me. The house was beautiful, but it was filled with ghosts, memories of a life that was no longer mine. It held the echo of Jessica's entitled laughter, the ghost of my own silent sacrifices. It represented the person I used to be, the quiet benefactor, the woman in the background. That person was gone, and I had no desire to live in her museum. I sold it quickly and for a good price to a young family from California. I watched them during the final walkthrough, their children running through the halls, their voices filled with excitement. The house would be happy again. I didn't buy another one. The thought of managing a large property on my own held no appeal. Instead, I found a lovely 2-bedroom apartment for lease in a quiet, beautiful community overlooking Lake Pleasant. It was a 30-minute drive north of the city, away from the Scottsdale scene, away from the gossip and the ghosts. It was a new beginning. The first time I walked in, the afternoon sun was streaming through the sliding glass doors, glinting off the vast expanse of blue water. The space felt open, airy, and full of possibility. It was smaller than my old house, but it felt infinitely larger. It was a blank canvas and I was the only artist. There was no big moving truck this time. Over the course of a week, I held an estate sale and sold or gave away most of the old heavy furniture that was tied to my former life. I packed my car with the things that truly mattered. My books, my photo albums, the oak desk that had belonged to Robert, and a few boxes of personal keepsakes. I was traveling light into my new future. Decorating my new home became my project, my therapy. I didn't go to expensive furniture showrooms. I spent my weekends exploring antique shops and flea markets in Cave Creek and Prescott. I found a sturdy, worn-in armchair that felt like a hug the moment I sat in it. I bought a rustic dining table with scratches and stories etched into its surface. I filled the walls not with expensive art, but with framed photos of my parents, of Robert looking young and handsome, of my travels from before he passed, and even a few of Jessica as a little girl, a small, smiling child with bright eyes, a reminder that there had been good times once before the world had tainted her. For the first time in my life, every single thing in my home was something I had chosen, something I loved. Nothing was there to impress anyone. Nothing was part of a performance. It was just mine. On the balcony that overlooked the lake, I set up a small container garden. I planted basil, rosemary, and thyme. Every morning, I'd come out with my cup of coffee and water them, watching the slow, steady progress of their growth as the sun rose over the mountains. Their earthy, honest scent would fill the air. I felt a similar slow, steady growth happening inside me. The quiet of my new life was a balm to my soul. I started taking long walks along the shoreline in the mornings, watching the fishermen cast their lines into the glassy water. I joined a book club at the local library, filled with interesting women whose conversations revolved around literature and life, not gossip and country club memberships. I rediscovered the simple, profound pleasure of reading a novel from cover to cover in a single afternoon uninterrupted. Work found me by accident. A woman from my book club owned a small, local business making organic skincare products. She was passionate and talented, but struggling to navigate the process of securing funding for an expansion. Hearing a little of my background, the sanitized retired nurse version, she asked if I'd be willing to consult for them just a few hours a week to look over their proposals and business plan. I agreed, not for the money but for the joy of it. The joy of using my mind again, of solving problems, of helping someone else build their dream. The gratitude in her eyes when we finally secured the small business loan was more rewarding than any socialite's empty praise had ever been. I heard news of Jessica sporadically through my cousin. She had been forced to move out of her apartment and had rented a small, generic condo in a less glamorous part of Phoenix. She told people it was a strategic move to downsize and focus on her brand. But everyone knew the truth. Her online boutique was failing. Her perfect life had been a house of cards, and a single gust of wind, a single email had blown it all away. I felt a pang of sadness for her, but it was a distant, detached sadness, like hearing about a stranger's misfortune. Her life was her own to rebuild now, on a foundation of her own making. My life was finally truly my own. One evening, several months after I had settled into my new life, a rhythm of peace and quiet purpose established, I was organizing the drawers of Robert's old desk. It was a task I'd been putting off, but now it felt right. In the back of the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old, yellowed stationery, my fingers brushed against a small velvet pouch. I knew what it was before I even pulled it out. Inside were the 4 jagged pieces of the gold credit card. I had almost forgotten about them. I emptied them into my palm and looked at them under the warm light of my desk lamp. They didn't seem menacing anymore. The sharp edges that had once dug into my skin, leaving angry red marks, now just looked like broken plastic. They were inert, powerless, stripped of all the meaning and pain they once held. The symbol of my public humiliation had become a relic of my private liberation. For a moment I considered throwing them away, walking down to the lake under the cover of darkness and scattering them into the water, letting them sink to the bottom and be forgotten. But that didn't feel right. They were a part of my story now, a pivotal, ugly, and ultimately transformative chapter. They deserved more than to be simply discarded and erased. They deserved to be remembered, but on my terms. I remembered something from my childhood. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled down a small, wooden box from the top shelf. It was a cedar box, beautifully made, with a simple, elegant leaf pattern carved into the lid. My father, a man who was good with his hands, had made it for me when I was a girl to keep my treasures in. Seashells from a family trip to California, interesting rocks I found in the desert, a silver dollar my grandfather had given me. It smelled of safety and unconditional love. I took the box back to my desk and opened it. The faint, sweet, nostalgic scent of cedarwood filled the air. The velvet lining inside was a deep, faded burgundy. I picked up the first piece of the broken card, the one with my name on it, and placed it inside. Then the second, the third, and the fourth. They lay there, no longer a weapon that had been used against me, but a trophy I had won. They weren't reminders of the moment Jessica thought she had ended me. They were a talisman. Proof that I had survived. Proof that my silence had never been surrender. It had been strategy. Proof that my strength didn't come from shouting, but from enduring, from planning, from knowing my own worth even when the person I loved most in the world did not. I pulled out the leather-bound journal I had started keeping since the move. On a clean page under the day's date, I wrote down the words that had been forming in my mind for months, the simple, profound truth I had come to understand through all this pain. Strength is not screamed. It is lived. It is built in silence, brick by brick, until it is a fortress no one can tear down. The ink from my pen flowed smoothly onto the page. The letters were firm, unbroken, the handwriting of a woman who knew exactly who she was. I closed the journal and felt that truth settle deep within me, into the very marrow of my bones. It was a quiet, powerful feeling, the feeling of unshakable peace. I closed the lid of the cedar box and placed it on the bookshelf above my desk. It wasn't hidden away in a locked drawer. It was there in plain sight, a simple wooden box that held the story of my breaking point and my rebirth. It was a reminder that sometimes, from the ugliest moments, the most beautiful strength can grow. That night I stood on my balcony, my palms resting on the cool metal railing, and I breathed. I took a deep, deliberate breath, letting the fresh, clean desert night air fill my lungs. And as I exhaled, I let go of the last lingering trace of bitterness. It drifted away into the darkness, over the still black water of the lake. I don't hate my daughter. I think that's the strangest part of this whole affair. The white-hot anger has burned away, leaving behind a kind of hollow sadness, a quiet grief for the relationship I thought we had, for the daughter I thought I knew. I pity her. I pity the fact that she built her entire sense of self-worth on such a fragile, hollow foundation of money and appearances. I pity that she never knew me, not really. She only saw the role I was playing for her, the quiet, simple, dependent mother. She never saw the woman who worked double shifts until her bones ached, the woman who studied investment reports until her eyes burned, the woman who built an empire in silence just to give her daughter a kingdom. Maybe one day she will understand. Maybe one day, after she's been forced to build a life for herself, brick by painful, humbling brick, she will look back and realize what I gave her wasn't just money but a chance. A chance she squandered so spectacularly. But that journey of understanding, if it ever happens, is hers to take alone. My role in her story is over. My own story is just beginning, here on this balcony, under a canopy of a million stars. My life now is measured in a different kind of currency. It's measured in the quiet satisfaction of a consultation well done, in the easy laughter of my new friends from the book club, in the simple, profound joy of watching the sun rise over the lake with a hot cup of coffee in my hands. It's a quieter wealth, but it's real. It's solid. It can't be frozen or repossessed. It can only be earned through living. The cedar box sits on my shelf, a quiet sentinel. It's a reminder of what I've overcome. It's proof that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes lead to the most profound liberation. Sometimes your world has to be burned to the ground so you can build a new one, a better one, on the ashes. Sometimes the people who try to break you are the very ones who force you to discover how unbelievably strong you truly are. And as I looked out at the horizon, where the dark water met the starry sky, I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. I was no longer a secret benefactor or a silent partner in someone else's life. I was just Carol, a 65-year-old woman with a beautiful view, a quiet life, and a future that was for the first time completely and utterly my own. And I was free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel it's important for us to speak up and know we aren't alone. My question for you is this: have you ever had to reclaim your life from someone who took you for granted? Let me know in the comments below. Your story matters. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories from people just like us. You are not alone.